Hey, folks, welcome to the Gotham Database podcast where we're learning about DC heroes. Today's episode is going to be a episode that I recorded a while back when I was doing a DC Heroes podcast, and the podcast episodes got lost to time. It was probably around 2018 or so, and I wanted to re-upload it here. It's myself and a co-host, Collin, of Dead Game Society. We're talking about DC heroes and our favorite editions and what the podcast was going to be about. I'm repurposing it for this podcast, so I hope you enjoy, because if you do, can learn something over the next couple of episodes of us. And it should help kick things off before the actual show itself, when I get my co-host gets things going. Hope you enjoy, and don't forget to go to the Gotham-database.com for more. So I'll jump right into the question, and Collin will jump in and answer the same questions for himself and introduce himself, so we can get the introductions out of the way. If those are familiar, you can probably just skip these parts that may know as Collin. You may know him too. When he gets to it, he'll explain that. But I did find out about DC Heroes probably mid-'80s. I'm going to say 86, probably around there. I was about 11 at that time. We were playing a little bit of D&D at the time. We were playing a little bit of Marvel Phase Rip, the first that yellow box that they had out, the original. I think it's called the original set, where you can only play like the Thing, Captain America, things like that. And I remember seeing the game, and it was being played at the summer camp that I was at, like across the table. There were a bunch of kids playing, and I'm like, oh wow, Superman, Batman. So I started watching them, and then, I never got a chance to play because, camp is camp stuff, and you don't always have time to do stuff. And then time went by a little bit, and I found a copy of the Batman role-playing game when that came out for the movie. So technically my first role-playing experience is the Batman role-playing game. I skipped first edition completely and went right into the Batman RPG, which I found was a lot of fun. I mean, it was probably the first RPG book that I was able to afford on my own, because it wasn't that expensive. For one, it was I think it was only like $10, because it was like supposed to be mimic a graphic novel or something at the time. I'm not quite sure. I'll have to look at the book to see how much it was, but
yeah, it was smaller than a regular text.
Yeah, it was graphic novel size. They were trying to bank on comic books / they were trying to bank on the Batman movie that just came out that summer. So that was basically, I ran that. I picked it up and I ran that for my friends. One of my friends made up he called himself the Dark Knight, but he wasn't Batman. He was actually Spider-Man, dressed like in the Venom costume, which I was just like, that's not the Dark Knight. That's Venom Spider-Man, dude. But he was a big Spider-Man fan, whatever. And I had another buddy that made up his own version of Wolverine. He just called himself Claws. So that was our two characters, and they just constantly just battled each other. Instead of battling villains, they just battled each other because they both hated each other's characters. So that was how our gaming session went, and it was pretty much crazy. We played that summer, and then I finally picked up second edition DC Heroes, that black box set with it was a Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman on the cover, I believe it is, with the DC logo.
Yeah, just Superman and Batman.
Oh, okay, yeah, I don't have it in front of me, and it came with the wheel and the instruction manuals, and I started getting into that heavily, playing that on weekends with my friends. That was probably my favorite edition of the game for the longest time, until late 90s, early 2000s, and then I happened to, because I missed third edition completely when it came out. It was just like, it came out, I was just like, oh yeah, all right, well, I already have second. What's the point of getting third edition at this point? And I was like, yeah, all right, I'll get it. And then by the time I went to go get it, the local gaming store, the Mortar and Brick comic gaming store, had gone out of business. It was called Waterloo on Long Island, New York. And they just went out of business. And there were no gaming stores in that immediate area, so I was just like, all right, and whatever. And then I wound up picking up third edition finally I want to say early 2001. And I read it, I'm like, oh, this is actually really good and amazing. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. So I started looking more into it online and finding people online to play, because of course, whenever you want to play a game, you can never go find anybody local to play a game during that time frame. I have no idea why. And then I saw that I think Blood of Heroes was out at that point by Pulsar Games, but I had picked that up because it was not that expensive. At that point, I was living in Connecticut, and we did have a gaming store / comic book store called Sarge's Comics, which was pretty big. It was like the size of a department store type deal. It was that big, and he had a basement, and he let us go there on the weekends and play before the store opened. We used to go there at like 11 because the store opened to 12, and we would play until almost midnight. And he closed at 10 because the owner would actually join in on games when he wasn't actually doing anything. So, hey, why not, right? Blood of Heroes I picked up through him. I went through that book, and I wasn't particularly a fan of it. I mean, I could see people liking it, but there were just some things off about it when I was reading it and wanting to play it. I was just like, this seems like someone house ruled a bunch of stuff in here. And then next thing I know, that it was completely pulled off the shelves and gone. I never knew why, and I figured out later on. But that's for a different time. We're going to do an actual show on Blood of Heroes, and we're going to talk a bit about that. All right, so yeah, Collin, let's talk a little bit about you now. I gathered up enough time there.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so I mean, some people know me, Collin. I've done some podcasts with the Dead Game Society, and also did that old school blues podcast for a while.
Oh yeah.
Haven't done one for a while, but so I jumped at the chance to get involved with this one because I really love this game. I love the DC universe, and I mean, really, in addition to this game, I play a whole other DC games as well. I mean, even the DC universe, West End Games. That I run at conventions. Yeah. I'm like one of the only guys in the world that actually runs that thing. But I mean, this game, I think the first time I encountered it was I was living in Europe at the time when I was a teenager, and my buddy who was on a military base at the time, like a teenager, he's like 15. It's just like 1985, and I'm looking through his DC Comics collection. He had all these boxes, and I mean, he just hundreds and hundreds of DC Comics. I mean, he had like Superman going all the way back to like the 200s,
Mm-hmm.
And in the back of one of the boxes was the first edition box set for DC Heroes, Mayfair Games. And I opened this up. I'm like, what is this? He's like, oh, it's a game. It's you can run these heroes and everything. And I had never heard of it, even though I had been playing D&D since '79. Since I was about 9 years old. So I saw this and I thought it was really cool. And I played it with him and a couple other guys. He kind of taught me how to play it, but we didn't play it very much. We kind of played here and there, but still back then I was more into kind of D&D and played a little bit of Call of Cthulhu at the time. But like Vince, in the late 80s, when Batman the movie came out, also Batman the RPG came out.
Right.
And I picked that up, I think at like B. Dalton Books or something in downtown Chicago. I think I went through there and I found that, and I grabbed that and we played that a little bit. And of course we'll talk more about this later, but it's more of a kind of a street level scaled down version of the DC Heroes game.
Yeah.
It's a lot simpler and it's a ton of fun. It really is the same system really, but it was just a more concise in its approach.
I'd like calling it 1.5 edition, to be honest.
Yeah, that's true. And then I think I played first, and I played that, and I got the second edition box set, but I had a hard time finding people to play with because by that time I was kind of like in college and stuff.
See?
But I returned to this a little later on when I started attending conventions a lot, like in 2005, around there. So I basically gathered all this stuff up together, including the third edition rules, and then I started running the games at conventions. So I would go up to Origins or Gen Con or Gary Con and I would start running these games and people it was received pretty well. We had a lot of fun running them, so I kind of became kind of a advocate for DC Heroes, which I still am. I love the games, so yeah, I thought it would be fun to do a podcast about it.
Didn't you just run something at Origins? No, Origins happened. No, Origins didn't happen. Yeah, it did, didn't it? I don't know at this point.
No, I ran something at GaryCon.
That's it, GaryCon. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I ran a game. It was a game where you play, what was it? It was Batman and like Black Canary and Huntress and a few other characters. And there's this huge showdown in the Iceberg Lounge at the end. And there's like Ra's al Ghul in there and the Penguin, and I had this big map this big like full color map of the Iceberg Lounge. So you get your characters are moving around and hiding behind pianos while people are shooting laser beams, and we had a lot of fun with it. So that was good. That was the last one I did.
We should definitely have a topic in the future running convention type games, because I know there's a lot of people out there that just want to run these type of games at conventions, but they're not sure how, and you'd be the perfect person to actually give advice on that. So I think we should spend kind of a show on that later on.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. I think the game lends itself pretty well to convention play. And one thing we'll talk about, which is great about the game, is that unlike other role-playing systems where you have very complex character creation and big long character sheets, you think about like 5th edition, you have a character sheet that's like 3 pages long, right?
Geez.
With this, it's just like not even half a page.
Yeah, true.
For your character, like all your attributes, all your necessary information is right there. And in a lot of the editions, which we'll talk about, it came with the cards that have the superheroes on them. Like, so the 1st edition came with those kind of like half-page size cardboard, cutouts with Superman or Batman or Wonder Woman on there,
yes,
all their necessary stats. And then I think when 2nd edition came out, they also came out with cards that were smaller, almost like the size of playing cards. Yeah. And there's a whole lot of them. Yep. Did that come with your 2nd edition, or is that just?
Yeah, mine actually had the playing size cards in them with like it was really small printed, but they were playing size card, correct.
And there's like a ton of them. There's like 52 of them.
Yeah, I think, the number 52, which is a
right,
recurring theme everywhere on DC.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, so
cool.
But yeah, so that was my that's kind of how I got into the game, and I'm probably going to be playing it more and more in the future. So as we go on.
Oh yeah, as we get more into this, hopefully more people will find the show and start listening. Maybe they'll pick up the game. Now, I'm going to warn people out there right away. This game is not the cheapest game right now to purchase if you're going out there looking. You're going to have to do some hunting on eBay, on Amazon, because I can tell you right now, that box set for 2nd edition, which is probably the one thing that most people gun for, is not cheap. Sometimes you could find the books pretty cheap, but you got to have one of those filters set up and alerts for yourself on Amazon and for eBay. I do know I did see the 3rd edition book recently on eBay for sale for about $50. So, and the cheapest I've ever seen 3rd edition was about $28, but that was like a really bad copy. So you got to keep your eye out and just keep looking, keep searching, and you'll find it. Worst comes to worst, you grab the Batman RPG, because it's pretty much the same thing, just minus a few things here and there. And you can always add your own stuff as you need it. But if you just want to get a feel for the game, Batman. If you really want to not spend a lot and have similar rules with just minus the DC stripped out, I would definitely suggest Blood of Heroes then. But that's your call on how much money you want to spend, so...
Yeah, the challenge is to find the 2nd edition set that's complete.
Yeah.
That has everything in the box.
Yeah.
Which is just like it is with any boxed edition of anything, right? I mean, even the 1st edition would be hard to find a complete version, but the 2nd is the one that everybody wants.
I actually had got lucky with the 1st edition. I've never owned the 1st edition up until maybe 2 years ago. There was someone in our group here on Facebook, in the Megs group, that was actually selling his complete collection because he needed to pay bills and stuff like that. So he was basically getting rid of all of his RPG games. One of the things he had on there was the 1st edition box set with everything in it, including the original cards. So
nice.
I jumped on that. I was like, I don't have it. I want that. I've never had it. So I got that. All right. So... you're obviously a big DC comic book reader fan, much like myself. This time we'll start with you. What is your first experience you remember with DC Comics, just so we can get a baseline of what, where you started from, where you're coming from?
Yeah, I remember it pretty vividly, because I think I was about maybe 7 years old, and I got a book for Christmas, and I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was a history of comic books. And remember, it's like back in the 70s, right? So with this big, like, hardcover book.
Yeah.
It had all these reprints in it of classic comic book stories from, like, the Golden Age, right? So for Marvel, they had stuff like the Human Torch, like the first Human Torch.
Yep.
Not Johnny Storm, like the old guy. And it had that in there, but they also had the first appearance of the Joker in a Batman comic.
Okay.
And I mean, to this day, I still think that's one of the best storylines ever. That's the one where the Joker is poisoning people with the gas,
Yeah.
and they're dying with big smiles on their faces.
Mm-hmm.
And Batman and Robin have to go and stop him. So, and I remember looking through there, and I was like, "Oh, this is just so cool." It's like it was the first time I had really encountered Batman. It's like 6, 7 years old. And then after that, I would go down to our local place to get comics, which was basically like an elevated train station in Chicago. It was like a newsstand.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go there, and they would have the comics there that you could buy before getting on the train. And then I would start picking up, Justice League or Batman or Action Comics from there and start reading through them, along with Marvel and other stuff. But I do remember that as being like kind of the first time I was introduced to the whole DC world. So,
all right.
How about you?
Well, all right. Well, my story is a little bit different because I didn't get into comics until probably the mid '80s as well. My family, let's see, my parents divorced when I was about 9 or 10. So the typical, your father comes picks you up on the weekend and you'd spend the weekend with him. The whole blah 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 story you heard from back then. So what happened was my father would always pick me up on Saturday mornings, and we would hang out for the day. The typical whatever thing parents do. I don't vaguely remember it at this point, but but he would always show up, and he would always have some comics for me because he was like, give you a little something to read while we drive or whatever until we get to my house, blah blah blah. So my first comic, I had to look up exactly what it was because I only remembered what the cover was. And I went back, and it was a Superman special number 3 from around '85. It was that cover of Superman flying and that green goo all over. What's like it's kryptonite because Amazo was zapping him with his powers. I don't know if you remember that. It's probably such a long time ago, but I had to look it up, so I started Googling that, and I found it thanks to Mike's Amazing World of Comics. It was a special number 3 from January '85. The last appearance, I think, of Amazo in Superman comics, but that one and Batman and the Outsiders. And Batman and the Outsiders, I remembered it because it had that weird cover. It was like an Egyptian cover. I don't know if you remember that at all, but that was also around the 84, 85 time frame. He got me that, and I don't remember what it was, but it was a Punisher comic. So I remember him standing there, and he was kind of like sideways, and he just had a shotgun in his hand. And I was like, who the hell is this guy? And he was like, oh, yeah, these are the comics that I've been reading. And my father apparently was into comics. I had no idea. So, yeah, he purchased those for me. Those are the first 3 I remember reading. And from there, I went and as soon as I got back and I started, my mom was like, oh, I need to go to the comic book store. So she brought me to the local comic book store, which was at the time Future Comics, I think it was called. Vaguely remember. It was either that or Grasshopper. I can't remember. It was such a long time ago. But I remember going to the store, and I was just like, yeah, I want more Batman, and I want more Superman. And the guy's like, all right, well, if you want them both, how about Justice League? And I think that was around the time frame when Justice League Europe was around, or was it international? I can't remember which one it was. I remember that Guy Gardner was part of the group, so I'm thinking that it might be international.
Was that pre or post Crisis?
Probably has to be pre. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine 85. Crisis happened the end of 85, early 86, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I remember the group had Batman in there, it had Guy Gardner in there, it had Captain Marvel in there. Martian Manhunter came in. Black Canary wound up coming into the book. I can't remember the other members of it, but it was a pretty big book that DC had just recently started with the Justice League. So I started reading that for a while, and that was probably one of my favorite comics, along with Batman and Superman at the time. Then I wound up getting into Green Lantern because they had a Green Lantern in the, how that little rabbit hole goes with Justice League. Once you start reading one of those books, you find out each of the characters have their own books, and you start buying those books, and you become broke.
Yeah, I remember right around that time too. Is that they came out with some new Dr. Fate material?
Yes, Dr. Fate. That was one of the other members I couldn't. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, they had like a mini series which was really good. I remember getting that. I was like, gosh, I had to be 14 or something when that came out, but I loved it. So.
Yeah. All right,
Yeah.
cool. So that's a little bit. We just wanted to give you guys out there a little bit of a basis line where we come from comics wise. I wasn't really a Marvel reader, though I did read some things in Marvel, like Punisher and some Spider-Man. Of course, the major event like Infinity Gauntlet, things like that. But again, we're a DC podcast. We're not going to talk about Marvel.
Right.
So yeah, sometimes it happens. You refer to certain things to the time period. So
Right.
so first from you, Colin, what do you think? What do you want to tell these people out there this podcast is going to be about? What do you think this is going to be about?
Yeah, so I think, we talked about creating a podcast kind of revolving around the DC Heroes RPG, but really with the idea that we would help you develop ways of translating these comic book adventures and some of these scenarios into gameplay. So not just talking about rules. I mean, we will talk about the rules. We'll get into some of the mechanics, but more along the lines of how do you develop settings and scenarios? How would you run a convention game? How would you run a campaign? And how can you keep really interesting narrative focus?
Yeah.
And get that great real comic book feel. And when I kind of thought about it, I was thinking about like the great Batman the animated series or some of that stuff, which I really love too, in addition to the comics, and how well that would translate into a game, and how you could put those things together into let's say an interesting adventure with Mr. Freeze and Batman or something along those lines. So trying to help game masters and players, right, build scenarios and adventures that are engaging and different, than what you might normally play in, like, let's say D&D or Call of Cthulhu or something else, and kind of focus on what makes this game unique. Does that sound about right there, Vince? Or
oh yeah, absolutely. When we talked about this on the side, and we talked about this for a good couple of weeks before we started doing this, I would say probably two the most. We were chatting about this on and off via Facebook. And Colin and I have done podcasts before in the past, so we're familiar with each other's style, but we were just trying to nail this particular down. We didn't want to focus on just be like, so on page 7 of the book, it says, because really that's boring, and you could read it on your own. And you can go on the internet and Google thousands of different ways to do something in the game, and yes, you can literally find thousands of ways. So we're going to step back from that and let those people handle that. And while we will cover the rules, the modules, the supplements, but we're going to try to cover it in a way that, like Colin said, how you can apply it to, say, Batman the Animated Series, the Justice League Unlimited cartoon, any of the various movies that DC puts out that are so awesome. Those cartoons are amazing. Some of them, like Young Justice, and I just recently watched Justice League versus the Fatal Five. Have you caught that one yet?
Oh, no, I haven't seen that one.
Oh, dude, that is
I will, though.
Really good, really good. They did a good job with Mr. Terrific in that. I was really impressed. I was like, Dude, this dude is awesome.
Yeah.
But, because I was used to him on Arrow, watching him on the CW, and obviously for, budgetary reasons, they can't exactly do everything they did in the cartoon or the comics, but they made him more in the little T-balls aside, they made him more of a badass in the comic, and I should say the cartoon, than compared to the actual TV show. So I was like, oh wow, this dude's awesome. So
yeah, I think the last animated film I saw was Superman Doomsday.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, that was a really good one. He had like Talia al Ghul in there, and that was a great one.
Wasn't that recently in the movie theater, or was that maybe that was Reign of Superman that was in the movie? There was one of them. There were two films that just recently came through the movie theater here.
Right. No, I don't think it was that one, because I think the Superman Doomsday is a few years old now.
Oh, okay.
I just had the DVD like sitting in my collection forever, and I finally threw it in there and watched it. But I don't know what the latest one is.
So here's a little bit of a curveball that wasn't on our notes for you, and it still kind of applies. What is your go-to edition out of the three of them? And we'll include Batman, the role-playing game, as 1.5. So out of the 4 editions, we'll say, if you're going to go play DC Heroes, you're going to pick what?
I'll probably pick second.
Okay.
Which doesn't come really as a surprise.
No.
That tended to be the go-to version. But, third is fine, too.
Oh, yeah.
There aren't real big fundamental differences between the editions.
I was with you up until probably 6 or 7 years ago, and then I really, after I moved, I found my books again in a box. And I'm just like, you know what? Let me sit down and read third edition from cover to cover. And I was just like, wow, all right. I read, okay, so these are the differences. And I had my second edition box set, so I pulled that out and I was looking at things side by side. I'm like, it's really not that, like you said, not that big of a difference. Minor things here or there. And third edition does clarify things, like certain things that were left open ended in second edition. And I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm sold on third edition. I was kind of sad that it was only one paperback book.
Right.
As opposed to, I understand at the time they were trying to save money and it was at the end of the run and the license.
Yeah, they even say that at the beginning. They actually like kind of apologize for it. Like when you first open up, it's like, why not a box set? Well, this is more inexpensive and easier for players to get and stuff. So
yeah, and that's the trend that everything was starting to go through at that point. Was it went from books to everything has to be in a box set to let's save some money and throw just the book out. You notice now we're back in that time frame of everything has to be in a box again. So
I know it's interesting how things have changed because for so long everything was text.
Mm-hmm.
These big hardcover texts. Especially when you get in like D&D where it was like, well, you need these following 7,
1,000
hardbound text versions, for $400.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so
everything's
I love box sets.
Oh yeah, definitely. And there are some small time companies that just produce box sets and they're just amazing. So, and I think the big time companies like Wizards of the Coast and Paizo and Green Ronin, I couldn't think of another company name, are just like, you know what? That's not a bad idea. Let's try it. And then they start making their own and they see how well it sells and everything comes back around again. And it's like, everything has to go in a box.
Right.
Yeah, so I am third edition, but whichever you want to play. We don't really, fight over editions here.
And I was going to ask too, is that if anyone listening is not familiar with the game, right? You have not played the game. You love DC Comics. You love the animated series and the live action movies, and you just have never even seen this game. Vince, how would you describe it in a nutshell? What can people expect from it?
That's a good question. I would expect if you're a new player, a little bit of a learning curve, but if you have someone that knows how to play the game with you, you will not have an issue playing the game and having fun. That said, you do need to read the game cover to cover. This is not one of those things you just pick up and say, meh. You need to actually read through the book, get familiar with how the chart works, and how the modifiers work back and forth, and don't be afraid to ask questions. We have a whole group here on Facebook, the Meg's DC Heroes group, and there are tons of people that are willing to answer questions that you want to. And there's also, don't forget, I don't know if you're a part of it, but are you part of the Yahoo group still?
I haven't been there in a long time.
Yeah, there is still left over from the early 2000s, the DC Heroes Yahoo group. It was originally was One List back then, and then became e-groups, and then Yahoo bought them out, and now it's Yahoo Groups. But it's groups.yahoo.com, and you can go there and sign in if you have a Yahoo email address. And they actually have a group. It's like a mailing list, and you can go in there and read probably 20-something years plus of DC stuff. And there's still people that just go on there, and they write up characters, and they argue about rules and everything you expect from a bunch of geeks sitting on a news list group. So
yeah, I would say for people who are experienced to some degree with RPG games and they play D&D or again call it D6 or whatever, kind of abandon everything before coming at this one. This game is somewhat revolutionary in its design, and it's quite different than what you're going to be used to. A little bit of history behind it, it's Mayfair Games.
Yeah.
The company itself was founded back in the 70s, and the name Mayfair comes from the Mayfair of Chicago, which I think is up by Ravens. And originally they produced board games and railroad games and this kind of stuff. But then they got into DC Heroes, right? They got this license, and I believe it's Greg Gordon
Mm-hmm.
was the guy who was brought in to design it, and he's still active now, I think. He produced some stuff for Wizards in the late 2000s, like 2009, 2010. So he's still around. And in addition to this game, he also did Earth Dawn. Remember that, Vince?
Oh, he did Earth Dawn? I didn't know that.
He did Earth Dawn. Yeah,
It's right there on my
the
shelf. I'm looking at
FASA
it.
version.
Huh. No idea.
So yeah, he did some pretty cool stuff, and I mean, I think this is probably his most major work
Was
that he
he
did. But
also responsible for Underground too, or
I don't know.
because I
Yeah,
know
I'm not sure
DC,
about that.
I know Mayfair had Underground, which was like the stripped down version of, or like slightly modified version of the Megs game. So
Oh, okay. No, I don't know. I'll have to look that one up.
yeah.
But yeah, so the challenge with this game, as we'll find out as we get more into the rules and more into the game in later episodes, the challenge of the game was to develop a game world and a rule system that would allow for street level simple combat all the way up to galactic level encounters, right? Which is something that other games, the D20 system or all this other stuff, they don't have to contend with, right? So it's a real challenge to be able to put something together that's going to allow that scalability and flexibility to just make anything happen, right? Likewise, TSR's Marvel superheroes game, right? The
Phase
Rip, right?
Yeah,
They had the same kind of challenges, right? But these two games approach it in a very different way. And I mean, some people love one system, some people love the other, and other people like me, I love both. It's just different, right?
I
So
love them both because I run both podcasts. So
yeah,
well, each of them have their own points that are good and bad. I mean,
mm-hmm.
I like Phase Rip itself, the simple fact that it's simple, it's quick, and everything's very open ended. But with that said, things are a little too open ended on Phase Rip that leaves you going, all right, so we're gonna have to do this. And sometimes I like to have rules written out a little bit more, and that's where I think this system comes into play, where everything is scaled a little bit better, it's written out a little bit better. While some people may not like the dice system compared, because the face rip dice system is absolutely the simplest thing in the world to learn, this once you do learn the DC thing, it becomes second nature. And I've always had a special place in my heart for this game over any other game as far as superhero games. It's just that people, when they want to play superhero, they're always like Phase Rip or Champions. No one really, which is weird because this game was rated probably the best superhero game of the 90s. So I'm trying to figure out why nobody wants to play it, but yet they won't. They voted it one of the best superhero games of the 90s. So
yeah. I think one thing that I try to explain to people is that with this system and in this game, the things that should be simple, right? For instance, like we talked about the character sheet, right? You only have a small little sheet, there's attributes on there and a few basic information, and you're good to go, right? That should be simple, right? The things that should be simple are just that, but you can get very complex if you want to. So, so in that respect, yes, is the game a bit crunchy at times? Absolutely, but things that should be easy, like for instance, you have two tables, right? You have the action and the resistance table, or the result table rather. So you have the action and the result table. Those two tables essentially dictate everything that happens in the game. It's just two tables. It's not 15 tables. It's not 50, right? There are two dice, two 10-siders, right? It couldn't be any more simple than that. There's not 10 dice. There's not some weird, special custom dice you have to use. Nothing like that, right? So all that stuff is very simple, but other things can be a little more complicated, So if you think about, for instance, the difference between how you handle distance, like in Marvel, the face rip,
yeah,
where it's just kind of all in areas, right? 3 areas, or whatever. It's kind of very general.
yeah.
In DC, it's a lot more specific, right? You have these APs, right? You have, say, 4 APs of distance is 150 feet, right? And as your characters move through this game world, it's pretty exact. So it's not as general. So
And anybody out there that now is saying to themselves after Collin just said 4 APs, go, oh, I gotta do math. Point me to an RPG that you don't have to do math in, unless it's like a diceless system. Then yeah, okay. But no, almost every RPG you do, you have to do some type of math in it. That you have to figure something out. That's what these RPG games are about: figuring things out and playing with them. That's all.
That's part of the fun, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a puzzle, and you look through it and you learn it. And with this one, because it is this Mayfair exponential game system, right? Which sounds intimidating. It's just wrapping your head around it, and once you know it, it becomes very easy and second nature, and you can run it very.
Yeah, it's becomes second nature, and it becomes a fun system, and you learn to play it, and you just memorize everything, and you become the ultimate DC fan. No, you don't, but I can always hope.
Yeah. And then you always start small, right? You start with simple encounters, street level heroes, and then kind of work your way up from there, right? As a game master, you're not going to want to start with dark side battling the anti-monitor, right? That's that's gonna be a little tough to play. So start simple, and we will help you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Pick up whichever one you want to grab, and if you can. No, I won't say that. But pick up whatever you want to pick up out of there, whatever edition, and the rules are generally the same. I think the only drastic change was from first to second edition. That's when they kind of moved a lot of things around. So, I mean, the first edition box set is actually rather cheap, to be honest. For a game that came out in the early 80s, I'm looking right now on eBay. There's a bunch of them, almost full box sets, almost complete. Some of them looks like actually 2 of them are complete, and they're under $40. So
yeah, and I think the big difference between first and second edition had to do with Crisis, right? In the DC universe, where in the real comic book universe, things were codified and simplified, and some of the characters are scaled down. I mean, most people are familiar with the whole Crisis in the DC universe. I have in my notes here that the first edition actually had write-ups for like Silver Age and pre-Crisis characters alongside new post-Crisis write-ups apparently in there. I would have to look in there to make sure, but certain characters, their attributes changed post-Crisis. So that's really the big difference between first and second edition. The game did not fundamentally change.
Well, yeah, the actual system itself, just some of the ways of handling things had changed, and like Superman went from like a 50 strength down to a 25, I believe. That's
maybe it was 40. I thought. Something like that. I would have to look it up, but he had like 3 strength or something down to 25.
Yeah, we're getting into stuff that we weren't going to discuss, and it's one of those things about we discuss games. You go, as a normal gamer, you go off to air for thousands of tangents, but we'll try to rein it in. Don't worry.
Yeah.
All right, so now that you got an idea what the show is about, go out there, grab a book, start reading, and follow along with us as we go into this adventure of the DC universe and how everything is played, and we'll give you some ideas how things are run. Hopefully you'll enjoy them, and give us some feedback. You can always just go on anchor.fm/DCRPG, and you can leave us a voicemail through there, and you can leave us comments through there. We don't have our email address set up right now. We'll get something set up in the future. I'd rather just not keep the emails right now, just comments. We're going to throw these up on Facebook. We're gonna get a Twitter going. Comment that way as well. Other than that, we hope you've enjoyed our first show. It's just a simple overview show. I think we'll call this the overview show. And the pilot issue, whatever you want to call it. But yeah,